Welcome to my video on Fire Emblem Engage. In this video, I will be talking about an aspect of the story that I barely hear mentioned or talked about at all. And that topic is on family. This aspect of the story is littered throughout. First off is Alir, being raised by his abusive father Sombron. And as seen in chapter 24, past Alir is emotionless and completely monotone. I find it odd that past Alir is very vulnerable, even to people he has never met, such as Lumira. And what I find quite interesting is how a small act of kindness was enough for Alir to not attack Lumira once he found out that she was the divine dragon. Just think about how much he must have lacked any sort of love for him to be like this. He was so deprived of love that any little bit of love that he experienced, he just latches on to. In any case, this was the turning point for Alir, to which he eventually kills Sombron, ending the war. And at that point, Alir is full of life and have a bit of control of his emotions, acting more like a normal person. Then there's his relationship with Vale, which we don't really get much of until the end, when they find out that they're actually siblings. But I think it's better to start off with Vale's story first. For majority of the game, she is trying to look for her sibling that she has no idea how they look like. But all she knows is that she has their dragon stone, and since it's still in one piece, they're still alive. But that doesn't stop her from trying. Eventually, she gets to the point in the story where Alir dies in her arms and the dragon crystal shatters. And this is when she realizes Alir was her sibling. But well, now he's dead. Eventually, things happen and Vale gets consumed by Edgy Vale, and both Vale and Alir meet each other in what we can only assume is the afterlife. And Vale's ready to give in and end it all there, live the rest of their lives together like that. However, Alir was not ready to settle down yet. He wanted to save the world. And with Vale's help, it is possible that he can still continue his mission, so to speak. It did take a bit of convincing for Vale to help out and do what she can, but in the end she did her best to claim back her body and revive Alir with their corrupted abilities. This was more or less Vale's time to shine, as she has shown she is capable of greater things than she had thought she could be of, and not a defect as Sombron would constantly use to belittle her. Sombron always looked down on Vale, unless it was Edgy Vale, where when she succeeds at what he wants, then he has praise for her. But even then, his praises aren't so much praises as good job. And so even Vale had a poor relationship with Sombron. Well, all his children had, but that's besides the point. It is about Vale and Alir, as with chapter 23, Vale and Alir confront Zephyr and Gris. There's nothing too important about this, but what is important here is Vale and Zephyr's interaction. Even though Vale did see Zephyr as somewhat family, well, the Four Hounds, Zephyr did not quite feel the same way, nor did any of the other Four Hounds, but I'll touch upon that later once I get to the Four Hounds. Here we have Vale and Zephyr really expressing themselves quite a bit in how they truly feel. However, at the end of the map where you beat Zephyr and Gris, Zephyr, for one reason or another, had a change of heart and wanted to end on good terms with Vale. which she accepts, but disappointed it took this long and it is at the end of her life. Then there's chapter 25, when Vale kept everyone away from battling the corrupted Lumera so that she doesn't have to force Alir to face against her. However, Alir eventually breaks through the seal, and together they fight Lumera. Well, corrupted Lumera. Well, before Alir jumps in, Vale and Lumera had some interesting things they had to say to each other. Vale did mention that she had a mother and she did remember her, meaning she was raised by her mother, at least to some degree. However, the same cannot be said about Alir. Alir had made no mention of his mother from with Sombron. The only time he ever mentions mother is directed towards Lumera, which could be why Alir and Vale act very differently from one another under Sombron's care. I mean, considering how much Vale respected her own mother, it wouldn't be too hard to see why not. And at the end of the chapter, Alir has his final moments with Lumera. Alir and Lumera finally manage to have some level of closure before Lumera evaporates completely. And at the end of the game, we have Alir and Vale ready to stop Sombron with his plans. Even though he is done with their world, they want to make sure that Sombron does not terrorize other worlds like he did with their world. Despite the fact that both Alir and Vale were prepared to kill Sombron, they still were willing to try to connect to him in any sort of capacity. In a way, this shows a certain connection family members may have. Even though they might be horrible people, you are still blood related to them. In this case, it is the father, the abusive father that they still love in a way. They still hate him for how he treated them, but even though Alir and Vale were willing to be there for Sombron, of course, Sombron didn't really care, as he has other objectives, being to reconnect with the Zero Emblem, which Alir allowed him to try once again to do after we beat him, and this time the invocation worked and Sombron disappeared with the Zero Emblem. Now there's one more thing I want to talk about Alir that I forgot to mention, or two, depending on how you look at it. First is Alir inherited the Divine Dragon from Lumera. In a way, this can be seen as the adopted child taking up the family traditions and whatnot from their adopted family and taking it as part of their own. Then you have at the end of chapter 20, where Alir finds out that he is adopted. This devastated him, much like maybe some children who find out that they are adopted. But ultimately, they come to accept it and pay no real great attention to it, even if they are not family by blood. They are family by culture and experience, and they live their life as if they were family anyways. Now on to Nell and Nell, or Rafal. Nell and Rafal. Nell and Nell were twin siblings, or twins, and Nell and Rafal were also very much like twins. Not actual twins, like Nell and Nell, but it was a real connection for Rafal. And so when Nell died, Rafal took his place and acted as Nell's twin. And regardless of whether or not they were true twins or not, they always thought of each other as siblings. They're twins. They're true twins, even though they both knew it to be a lie. That, however, does not change their experience whatsoever, and their desire to keep that dream alive. Nell acted as the protective older sister to Nell, or rather, Rafal in this case. Then there is their relationship with Sombron. And in this world, Sombron's a bit different. He actually looks at his kids this time. Nell disliked Sombron, while Rafal, he had a bit of a different experience. Wait a second, I think I was still on Sombron though. And his desire was to have a true heir to his legacy. At first, he thought maybe Nell could be his true heir, as she massacred her siblings by accident, but she did it nonetheless. And then there's Rafal, who managed to gain the power to awaken emblems. And Sauron saw his power and noticed that he could surpass Nell's power. And so he more or less chose Rafal to be his true heir. That and, well, Rafal mentioned that he killed all their remaining siblings. So even in the off chance that he wasn't chosen, he kind of forced it to be him one way or another. And Rafal has taken upon himself to achieve Sauron's dream in dominating the world, more or less. And that is about it for the twin fell dragons. Wait, there's more. Nell sacrificed her life to save Rafal from the curse from the Dragonstone that Sauron put. And in return, Rafal uses life force to revive Nell. And after 1,000 years of giving up his life force to revive her, they came back and acted as if they were siblings once again, like nothing ever happened. Of course, this time Rafal acts as himself instead of pretending to be Nil, and they still deeply care for one another. Next up are the Four Hounds. They are an interesting bunch. Zephyr plays the role of the mother of the Four Hounds, but she does have an issue of not necessarily really acting like a mother. However, they do kind of explain why this happens towards the end of the game in chapter 24, where you get to see her conversation with Sombron, to which she learns from Sombron what it means to have kids of their own. To Sombron, they are merely tools for his own ambition. This shapes the way Zephyr sees family and how she treats them. Though even then, the way she treats the Four Hounds that she so calls family is similar to how Sombron would treat his kids, a reward and punishment style of parenting. This is especially apparent when you look at her relationship with Marnie. Whenever Marnie does a good job, Zephyr's there to provide some praises which she loves. However, when she messes up and makes mistakes, well, then punishment will surely await her. However, her punishments are quite extreme. For example, let us take chapter 5. The boss of chapter 5, Nelius? Well, whatever. The boss for chapter 5 failed Zephyr, and because of that, Zephyr decided that the punishment he deserves is, well, death. While on the other hand, we have chapter 19, where Marty and Mavier failed to stop Alir, but more importantly, they lost 2 rings to them. And this, well, prompted Zephyr to provide some punishment, to which she decided to knock them out cold. Now this shows some differences between Zephyr and Sombron. As with Nelius, his death is more or less how Sombron would do with anybody, even those who are kind of close to him, because no one truly is really that close to him. And so with the Four Hounds, Zephyr does have a connection with them, so it would require more for her to decide death to be a worthy punishment for them, though it did happen in chapter 21 where she killed Marnie because Marnie turned her back on Zephyr and tried to free Vale from the demonic energy and the wacky helmet. However, there is something else interesting that happens in this chapter, and that is Gris. He hates how Marnie had to die in that situation. He called it a pointless death. This is foreshadowing later in chapter 23, where he confesses to Zephyr where he likes the idea of being called a family of within the Four Hounds. This is in contrast to chapter 10, where he mocks at the idea of being called family. However, this can be interpreted as a front, hiding his true feelings, which people do. Not only that, and he does confess that he views Zephyr as a mother. Well, maybe not just a mother, like kind of beyond that. He loves her as like a maternal god of sorts. There's nothing sexual about it. Basically, worshipping a deity. And well, Gris more or less is the most loyal to Zephyr comparatively to the rest of the Four Hounds. Mavier, on the other hand, has a different kind of vibe to him. He doesn't quite fit the whole family mold, I would say. At best, he's like an uncle. Zephyr holds all the power, and she is the leader. However, he does act as an elder figure to Marnie. There is basically nothing between Marnie and Gris, as well as Mavier to Gris. Really, it's just kind of isolated connections with each of the Four Hounds. I mean, well, everyone has a connection to Zephyr, but they don't all have a connection to each other, which could be explored a little bit more. Well, I guess then you have Gris here, who gets annoyed by Marnie a lot, much like an older brother to a spoiled younger sister. Marnie also does not like how stoic Mavier is. Does see Mavier as kind of boring. And then we have Vale's relationship with the Four Hounds. There are some nice gestures from some of the members, but for the most part, not really much in the ways of family. It is more of a subordinate and master sort of relationship, even if Vale did see them as family to some degree. And so I guess that's about it for the Four Hounds. And as for the Four Winds, it really isn't that much better, if at all. The Four Winds do have more interactions with one another, further showing their dynamic with each other, but they still have a tendency to put Celestia, which is Zephyr's counterpart, and Gregory, who is Gris's counterpart, more together, while Madeline, which is Marnie's counterpart, and Mavier, who is, well, Mavier's counterpart, together. It still is those duos, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It is just you lose out on some more direct interactions and familiar feelings between some of the other pairings of characters. The thing with the Four Winds is that they do a better job of showing the dynamics than the Four Hounds. However, one of my issues is Madeline confessing her love. I mean, I want to take it as a love for one's own mentor, but it was pretty apparent that it is not that when we consider the end of chapter 4, or I guess the beginning of chapter 5, around there. You have the Four Winds kind of talking about love. And when it got to Madeline, she got all flustered and ignored the question, implying that she does have someone she loves in such a manner. And the only one that makes sense is Mavier with how she reacts. Well, at least Gregory's and Celestia's relationship doesn't go there. However, there's still a bit of an issue. After Mavier's death, Gregory does his best to be the best he can be as second in command from Mavier. However, this kind of makes a sort of separation between family and co-workers, shall we say, or I guess comrades. But then again, it could just be another layer on top of familial relationships. I mean, I don't really know what else to say other than the Four Winds isn't really a toxic family compared to the Four Hounds. And now on to the royals and their kingdom/queendom. Let us start with Firene, which represents the mother's heart of giving and providing. Kind of like the idea of cooking for the family, or I suppose for the kids in this situation, as well as, say, house chores. And, well, Alfred here represents the mother's heart of unconditional love for giving. He constantly wants to give to people. He constantly tries to offer services or whatnot for people. He is also very trusting of other people, maybe a little too trusting of people, as others have remarked. And I do want to talk about his relationship with Celine, only there really isn't any, aside, say, the supports in the DLC chapter. However, I am focusing more on what they show in the story without the supports, to which we effectively get nothing from Celine. But of course, we have the DLC chapters get a little bit more insight. And as the DLC chapter is more of a reverse or opposite aspects of these characters, and well, Alfred is the new ruler of Firene, and he does not give away his abundant resources to the other nations like they did in the main campaign. Then we have Celine, who is insistent on invading Brodia. Celine has become quite fierce, the aggressor, and so maybe we can take from this is retaliation and protection for Celine in the Emblem Ring world. So I suppose you can think of her as maybe a mother bear. Next we have is Brodia, which represents a father's strength. Diamant represents the use of power in a responsible way and for the greater whole, while Alcrest is about having courage to face one's own fear. And well, Alcrest, he sees Diamant as the perfect older brother who has no weakness, while he sees himself as worthless and full of flaws. Then there are their relationship with their father, King Morian. In Diamant's case, he is overprotective of Morian as he is not ready to be king yet, and so he does whatever he can to take extra precautions to make sure that his death will not pass as soon as it may. However, on the flip side, we have Alfcris, who does not share the burden of Diamant, who will succeed the throne. However, it falls on him to make sure Diamant doesn't die, and so he more or less dedicates his life to that. He is determined to keep Diamant alive, so much so that he is willing to sacrifice his own life for such cause. This kind of attitude is something Moria wants more of out of Diamant. However, the mere thoughts of anticipating Morian's death makes him too anxious to have such conviction, as he is not ready for his father to die. And well, then there's how this relates with the DLC Diamant and Alcrest. One way to take this is a possibility in how they may act once Moyen dies. Diamant becomes a pacifist, not wanting anyone else to die, versus Alcrest, who becomes arrogant after giving his all to protect and save Diamant. Again, this is only a possibility, but when you look at the main campaign and how Alcrest and Diamant reacted when they found out Moyen died, well, a little later when they escape from the cathedral, Diamant accepted the fact that he died and is aware of what is expected of him. However, we have Alcrest who became very angry and struggled to accept the fact that he was truly dead. Diamant did manage to get Alcrest to let go of his anger towards Ivy. So, with some tweaks here and there in their upbringings, their reaction to Moyne's death may have been different. Then we have Elucia, which I have a bit of trouble in figuring out what it might represent. To be honest with you, Elucia doesn't really work here. I'm not really sure what would work. Although one thing that comes to mind would be innocence, because Ivy is aware of the corruption and all the secrecy that happened in Elucia. Though this information is more locked behind supports, but it does provide some level of contrast between Ivy and Hortensia, as Hortensia has more or less little to no knowledge of what goes on in the background, and most of her concerns are her allies and her father. But it doesn't play into the father aspect. There's also, say, emotions versus logic, shall we say, or facts, which can kind of work, but also doesn't. But I suppose if we take Psalm for the basis of this, you might be able to argue that Elucia is a father's way of teaching through discipline, but I realistically got nothing. However, we can talk about Ivy's and Hortensia's relationship, which, much like Diamant and Alcrest, Hortensia looks up to Ivy a lot. However, unlike Alcrest, Hortensia still thinks highly of herself. However, she does have this loyalty to Elucia, as well as this desire to bring her father back, so much so that she was willing to go against Ivy, who was more or less in the position opposing Elucia. But Ivy convinces Hortensia that, first off, there's no way to bring Hyacinth back as who he was anymore. And second, Elucia's gone because of the Four Hounds and Sombron and Vale. Of course, you still have to fight her because of the demonic energy from Zephyr. But afterwards, she joins the party thanks to Ivy. And well, during the time Ivy was in our party and Hortensia was still in Elucia, she would be worried for Hortensia. And well, their relationship with Hyacinth, on the other hand, doesn't really get developed so much. And what little we do get is from Hyacinth, who has been acting differently than he had before. So we don't really get the true experience that they had of how great of a father he was by hearsay. But you do get some level of understanding from his death quote when you kill him as a corrupted. His regret for how he treated them once the Four Hounds came into his life. And so, we will move on to Psalm, the Queendom of Psalm. Psalm represents the mother's heart of allowing their children to be who they are, as Tamara represents the freedom of self-expression, while Fagado represents one's own ability to choose what they want to do. Tamara likes to go out on academy trips and sing with her retainers, while Fugado likes to go around and protect people from any outside invaders and whatnot. He wants to keep peace within the queendom. Sadly, there are virtually no conversations between Fugado and Tamira, and their conversation with Sephoria, much like Queen Eve, amounts to nothing for the most part. And unfortunately for the Illusion princesses and Solm's prince and princess, the DLC did absolutely nothing with their character. Well, I guess not nothing. They did a little bit with Ivy, but the other characters, there's not much to say about them. And well, this more or less concludes the video, but I would like to mention that quite a bit of this is just speculation. Well, really, it's just looking for something that isn't necessarily there, but forcing something to be there. However, it is still a way to look at it, even if it was unintentional. And with that, goodbye.